Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited. The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today.
Historical couples in crisis. One of my viewers wanted me to do another installment in the Historical Couples in Crisis series. And for this installment in the Historical Couples in Crisis series, I'm going to be talking about serial killer couple Fred and Rosemary West. Now, the first person I'm going to be talking about in this historical couple in crisis is Fred West. Now, Fred West was an English serial killer who committed 12 murders between 1967 and 1987 in Gloucester, England, with the help of his second wife, Rose West. Now, Fred West basically started on the road to becoming a man in crisis due to the dysfunctional way he was raised in his home in England, and as he was raised in that home by a strict disciplinarian father and an overly protective mother, he wound up on the road to becoming a beta male due to the fear of dealing with a male authority figure like his strict disciplinarian father, and this led to him forming a codependent relationship with his mother. And as he looked to submit to this female authority figure who basically turned her son into a mother's boy out of the six children who survived in his family, and wound up in codependent relationships with his siblings, Fred West was laying a foundation for dysfunction as related to how he related to the world and how he saw the world. Now, as he was in this world, he started to enter a place I call the secret world, and he entered the secret world because he could not deal with a strict male authority figure like his father, and because he couldn't deal with a strict male authority figure like his father or learn to respect male authority, he leaned on his mother, and as he was leaning on his mother, he felt the only place he could feel safe about expressing his natural masculinity and his natural sexuality was the secret world. And as he entered the secret world, sadly, as he was a part of that rose-colored reality, he wound up starting to head down a road of sexual deviancy. Now, according to Fred West, he said that he started down this road to sexual deviancy because he had been abused by his mother when he was 12 years old, and believed that this deviancy was normal because his father participated in the same type of deviancy with his sisters. However, Fred's younger brother, Doug, said that this is fantasy, and I would have to go along with his brother, Doug, because when it comes to these beta males, they live in a rose-colored reality where we will never really get the truth unless we go to the victims who can give us a clearer picture of these kinds of men, because these men do not live in our real world. No, they live in a distorted world where everything looks like our world, but everything is completely distorted. And because these men are distorted as related to their perception of the world, it's hard to get the truth from them. Moreover, when it comes to these kinds of men, they are extremely detached from people, and because they are extremely detached from people, they don't see people as people. No, they see them as objects in their world of fantasy, and as they see people as objects in their world as fantasy, what they do is they don't have regard for people, and that was shown in Fred West's adolescence as he was out here allegedly pestering women and girls, and would go and approach and fondle them without their permission, which in these days would be considered sexual assault. But Fred West basically got away with this because I believe primarily of white privilege. Moreover, when he would get a girl to accept his advances, he would go out here and just get his pleasure. And that's what beta males do. They don't have regard for their partners because they don't have a personal connection with them. And since they don't have a connection with people, they don't care about people. And that's what happened with Fred West. And again, this is before Fred West suffered an accident which fractured his skull and broke his arm in a motorcycle accident, and also led to him getting a trauma and fear of hospitals that led to him looking to explode in rage when people talked about them. Now, Fred West, as he continued on in his adolescence, suffered another head injury with a girl he tried to assault on a fire escape, and this girl fought back, punching and sending him falling to floors. So Fred West was on the road to becoming a deviant, like I talk about in The Man Crisis, as related to the sexual deviancy of the beta male, and was extremely detached from many of the women he had sexual relations with, and had started to become so detached from them that he could not go out here and differentiate as related to these women as being people who had emotional needs and had feelings and things that people needed to respect. He had no regard for any of these women's boundaries, and had even no regard for even the boundaries of family, because in 1961, Fred's 13-year-old sister, Kitty, told her mother that Fred had been abusing her since the previous December of 1960 and had made her pregnant. And in that incident, Fred West was arrested as related to this crime, which showed me a further escalation of his crime from sexual assaults to sexual abuse. And Fred West's whole response was quite troubling, because he freely and openly admitted to molesting and sexually assaulting young girls from an early age and was tried for these crimes. However, his mother, who was prepared to testify in his defense, and his sister, who was prepared to testify against him, both changed their minds. And as they changed their minds, the case wound up collapsing. And as the case collapsed, Fred West basically fell through the cracks of the UK criminal justice system to further re-offend again. And sadly, if they had stopped him there, they would have stopped this beta male from taking the lives of 12 women. Unfortunately, the combination of white privilege and a family that was looking to make their world smooth by trying to deny Fred West's deviancy, by trying to protect their family name, this allowed a killer to further escalate his behavior from participating in sex crimes to participating in murder. And even though the West family disowned him, Fred West was allowed to fall through these cracks to further commit more crimes. Now, what the family didn't understand, even though they were disowning Fred West to maintain their smooth world, where they wouldn't have to deal with the problems, conflicts, or issues as related to Fred West, they were making life much harder for other people, because when it comes to this kind of sexual deviant, they, in their quest to get their pleasure, their behavior escalates. And once they go from getting away with the crime of assault, which was what Fred West was participating in early on, to the crime of sexual abuse, what Fred West did with his sister, they escalate their crimes, because for these men, they get pleasure from getting power, of humiliating and just degrading women. And if the story of Fred West being molested by his mother is true, he was looking to get power as related to these twisted relationships over these women to make up for the power that he wanted as related to the abuse he suffered at the hands of his mother. That's what I would believe as related to these stories. And usually, this is the pattern as related to these kinds of males. They usually, again, go into these kinds of patterns of abuse because they want power. And that's what I believe Fred West wanted as related to these relationships. He wanted to get power, and he was using his penis and his body as a weapon in these relationships because these relationships for him were not about love. They were all about power. And that quest for power started as Fred West looked to build a home of his own. And as he built that home of his own, he started to follow in the dysfunctional footsteps of his parents as he got involved with his first wife, Rena Bernadette Costello. And as he got involved with Rena Bernadette Costello, he dated her for several months, even though Rena Costello was out here pregnant by an Asian bus driver at the time of her marriage to Fred. For Fred, it didn't matter to him because this woman had low self-esteem, and because she had low self-esteem, she was in the perfect place for him to get power in the relationship. Now, after Rena Costello got married to Fred West, he went out here and had started building a family with her as an ice cream van driver. And Rena's daughter by the Asian bus driver Charmaine was born in 1963. And in order to maintain his smooth world, Fred West and Rena told the lie that the daughter was adopted and she suffered a miscarriage. And after this, they decided to move to the Bridgerton district of Glasgow, where they had a second daughter. And as they had that second daughter, Fred West basically showed how detached he was as related to his family, because instead of showing affection to his children and showing love to them, he kept them caged at the bottom of a bunk bed with a space between the bunks, and the children were only allowed out when he was at work. So this was the foundation of his quest to maintain power and control over his family and go out and look to abuse them by treating them like objects or pets, not see them as people who need to be loved and people that you would want to share love and a connection with. Now, as Fred West was basically abusing the family he was starting, he started to become acquainted with Bernadette Costello's friend Anne McFall, who was despondent over the death of a boyfriend in a workplace accident, and she spent a lot of time at their flat. And as she spent time at their flat, Fred West was out here participating in many relationships with different women in all of these affairs, having no real care for anyone. Now, when Rena found out about these affairs, her response was to have an affair of her own with a man named John McLaughlin in an effort to spite Fred. Now, when Fred found out about this affair, he wound up punching Rena, and John McLaughlin wound up punching out Fred, who drew a knife to attack him. And after he wound up getting into this fight with John McLaughlin, Fred stopped defending himself, really showing me how he had a real serious issue with male authority and male authority figures, and really wanted to get all of the power over the women in his relationships, and really feared male authority and male authority figures. Now, John McLaughlin continued to have his relationship with Rena and continued to having this relationship with her, and became more upset about the bruises that she was getting as a result of Fred West. And every time she would come with a black eye, then John would come and beat up Fred. And in one incident, McLaughlin witnessed Charmaine, who was a little older than a toddler, asked Fred for ice cream from a van, and where Fred hit the daughter across the head, and this gave Fred another beating from John McLaughlin, and that really showed me how dysfunctional both of these people were. And the whole foundation for these beatings basically was a game of power and control, where it was a tit for tat back and forth game. And basically, what we had Rena doing was basically using John McLaughlin to be her white knight and her enforcer. And this went on until about 1965, where Fred accidentally ran over and killed a small boy with his ice cream van. Now, while he was cleared of any wrongdoing by police, again, more white privilege, he feared the hostile reaction and reprisal from locals who he depended on for his living, and that ended his chances of continuing as being an ice cream truck driver, and he was forced to go to Gloucester with Charmaine and Anna Marie, his daughters, and his wife, renting a caravan in Bishop's Cleeve. And Rena later joined them in February of 1966, accompanied by McNeil and McFall, who were the other women he was with. And all of these poor women basically were all being taken care of by Fred West, who had finally found employment driving a lorry for a butcher. Now, Fred, as he was dealing with this whole fiscal situation falling apart, looked to gain more power and control over all three of these women, and wanted to get more power and control because he was losing control over his own life. So this was a further escalation of his deviant behavior, because how Fred got power over women was not only by physically assaulting them, but by having them participate in acts of sexual deviancy. And because he didn't see any of the women that he was living with as people, he encouraged his own wife to go and participate in prostitution to supplement his meager income. And as he insisted on this, he was continuing to abuse and continuing to participate in more deviant sexual acts with all of the women he was involved with. And this led to Rena looking to call John McLaughlin to rescue her and McNeil and her children. And they all devised a plan to try to get away from Fred West. And by this time, what had happened was Anne McFall had started to fall for Fred West, because she had been broken at this point spiritually, and believed that Fred would go and marry her. But this was a major mistake on her part, because she thought, oh, he actually cared about them. But Fred West didn't care about them. No, he didn't care anything about any of these women. No, he basically was using them for their bodies. And in order to maintain his smooth world, he basically wound up taking the life of Anne McFall. And as he took the life of Anne McFall to keep her from people knowing that she was pregnant with his child, he wound up taking her life and then burying her remains, which he dismembered, and did this to maintain his smooth world, basically possibly telling when Rena came back that, it was that she had basically left, and with nobody there to care for the girls, they went temporarily to the social services. And as this was going on, Fred then got involved with Rosemary Letts, who would basically eventually turn into his future partner in crime. But Rosemary Letts herself was basically in a wreck of a life. She was a woman with daddy issues, and she was a woman with serious daddy issues that led to her getting involved with Fred West. And as she got involved with Fred West because she was a promiscuous woman, what she did was go out here and get involved with this guy, not understanding the danger that was coming from this man who already was married with 2 kids. But that didn't stop her from getting involved with him and eventually becoming his partner in crime. And as she became his partner in crime, she looked to eliminate the competition. and looked to eliminate the competition by participating in the murder of Fred West's adopted daughter Charmaine, and also looked to participate in the murder of Catherine Rena West, looking to eliminate her competition. And as she eliminated that competition, she then got married to Fred West. And as she got married to Fred West, she began to work as a prostitute, partially to help take care of the household and also explore the sexual deviancy with Fred West and other men and women. And as they participated in this sexual deviancy, Fred basically started submitting to Rose as a female authority figure, giving her his pay packets to control the money and control the room. And Fred, being a voyeur, was getting all of his pleasures as related to his further escalating world of sexual deviancy, because he got pleasure from not only participating in sexual deviancy with his wife and others he had casual sex with, but also from voyeurism by watching the incidents that his wife was participating in with her clients, and was also going out here maintaining a lifestyle as related to using all of this money to benefit himself. Now, in 1977, Rose's father began to tolerate Fred, and they opened a cafe called the Green Lantern, which quickly became insolvent. And when the father would find out about this, what was disturbing was he started to participate in relations with his daughter, just twisted and sick. And that the whole incidents with Fred West was people, hitchhikers and other women would come and go, and he would basically wind up taking the lives of these people when he participated in these sex crimes. And he basically started murdering people as a series of murders with Lynn after taking the life of his Anne McFall and others. Started to go after a series of murders, starting with Linda Gow, and basically wound up murdering all of these women, and wound up murdering them and burying them in the basement of his home. And what's even more disturbing was, even after murdering all of these people, he started to murder his own children, like Heather West, who wanted to try to break away from his home. And in his effort to stop his children from looking to go out and have lives of their own, what Fred West did was go out and look to murder his own daughter, Heather West, who wanted to leave. And then after murdering her, he basically buried her under a patio and said that the kids would wind up like this if they misbehaved. And this was, again, just absolutely twisted. Now, this whole thing culminated as related to the police starting to do their own investigation as related to the abuse of his daughter in 1992, who was abused. And after doing this, police searched the home for some stolen property. And after this, they found pornographic videos and other things in the home. And after they found all of this, they then did a further investigation, and as they did their own investigation, they began to find out more and more about Fred West and his series of bodies. And when they did a final investigation on a search warrant, they found human remains in the West home. And as they found these remains in the West home in 1994, they then arrested Fred West. And as they arrested Fred West for all of these murders, he confessed to quite a few of them. And after he confessed to quite a few of them, and confessed to murdering his own daughter and murdering all of these other women, he then wound up being charged with a series of murders. And with all of the charges of a series of murders, Fred was arrested, and then Rose was arrested as an accomplice. And as he was arrested and put into custody, Fred West was put on a suicide watch. And after Fred West was put on a suicide watch in January 1995, he committed suicide in his cell, showing us all the coward he was which is par for the course with beta males. Many beta males, they are big and tough by trying to break down women, but when they have to deal with male authority and the authority of the law, these men basically fall completely apart, and they can't take accountability for their actions. And because they don't want to take accountability or responsibility for their actions, what these men do is look to use suicide as an escape to avoid dealing with accountability and dealing with the criminal justice system and Bubba, Tiny, Roscoe, Big Dave, and Melvin and Mr. Sprinkles, because in the criminal justice system, when people hear about sex offenders like Fred West, they want to make that man pay for the evil he did. And Fred West did a lot of evil to this world, not only going out here and starting by participating in sexual assault and sexual abuse. He then escalated his behavior into murder and participated in these serial murders because he wanted to get power over women. And when those women had the audacity to say no to him or defy him, or have the audacity to look to disrupt his smooth world like his daughter Heather did, he believed that he had justification to just take their lives. And that was the main reason why he wanted to maintain control, because he felt powerless about his own life. And because he felt powerless about his life as a man, he looked to try to control the lives of others through his violent acts. And his violent acts and his serial murders were all about power and control, because for Fred West, it was all about power. It was all about having the power he never thought he could have as a man. And that's what made him a dangerous man in crisis. A man in crisis who is one of the worst monsters I have ever read about. I mean, he's one of the sickest and most depraved individuals. But when I look at Fred West's story, it shows me how deviant and depraved a beta male can become, as related to him being a part of the secret world. And his behavior basically shows me what happens when a boy grows up to become a man in crisis. Now, the second person in this historical couple in crisis I'm going to be talking about is Rose West. Now, Rose West was the wife of serial killer Fred West and assisted him in torturing and murdering at least 9 of the women that Fred West participated in murdering between 1973 and 1987, and also murdered the 8-year-old stepdaughter of Fred West, Charmaine West, in 1971. Now, Rose West basically wound up on a road to becoming a woman in crisis even before she met Fred West, and was possibly on a road to becoming a woman in crisis ever since the day she was born in a dysfunctional home environment. Now, Rose West was born to William Andrew Bill Letts and Daisy Gwendolyn Fuller after a difficult pregnancy, and was the 5th of 7 children born into a poor family to a mother who suffered from depression and was given electroshock therapy during and immediately after her pregnancy. And some speculate this could have led to the prenatal developmental injuries to Rose West that could have caused a lot of the dysfunction as related to her frame of thinking. Now, others speculate that Rose's father, who suffered from schizophrenia, went out and sexually abused Rose West, and this could possibly be the foundation for Rose West winding up on the road to becoming a woman in crisis. Because when women or girls are molested and abused by their fathers and neglected by their mothers, it basically puts them on the road to becoming a woman in crisis, because they're learning dysfunction from minute one, and they're not learning how to function in life. And it's clear to me that Rose West really didn't have good female life skills or female survival skills, or even have a foundation for respect for men as related to a healthy relationship, and grew up basically detached. Because from when I look at her alleged behavior during adolescence, she became fascinated with her developing body and would walk around naked in the presence of her younger brother. And this is not healthy behavior. No, this is the kind of behavior that people who are molested wind up participating in because they don't understand the concept of boundaries. And because they don't understand the concept of boundaries, they have no real regard for other people's rights. And this is basically shown to me with the way Rose West allegedly would go out when she was 13 years old and creep into her 9-year-old brother's bed and look to molest him and her youngest brother. It clearly shows me that there was a real serious issue as related to Rose West due to the dysfunctional way she was raised by a father who basically abused her sexually, and then she wound up expressing that behavior because this was the model of dysfunction she was shown when she was young, and passed that on as related to the abuse of her brothers. And as she participated in this abuse, she then was out and about when she was about 15 years old, and she first encountered Fred West at a bus stop when she was 15 years old, and Fred was 27, and it basically shows me that she went from one abuser to another abuser because a 27-year-old married man like Fred West already knew that this girl was a child. However, because Fred West was a sexual deviant and had no regard for children and had no regard for boundaries, he basically looked to try to pursue a relationship with Rose Letts during the time of 1969, and quickly started to look to lavish attention on her. And when he found out that she was working at a bread shop, he persuaded a woman to try to give her a gift since she rejected his initial advances. And after she got the gift, that's when she decided to go on a date with him. And that basically shows me that Rose West basically had no real understanding or discernment because she was still a child and still looked to pursue a relationship with Fred West, even though Fred West was married and had a child. And as this was going on, what we had Rose going out here still looking to continue to have a relationship with this man, and wanted to have a relationship with this man basically because he, one, was paying attention to her, and two, he had basically shown her that he had power in the fact that he was out here an older man paying her attention. And I believe this triggered her naturally twisted hypergamy to think that she was monkey branching to a quality man. But sadly, she was getting involved with a man just like her father. And as she got involved with this man just like her father, she went from getting involved with one man in crisis to getting involved with another man in crisis. And this basically proves a point that I wrote in my book, The Woman Crisis, about how whenever you have a woman who's indoctrinated into feminism, she gets these daddy issues. And again, because the dysfunctional model of her father is what she's seen, she goes out here and gravitates towards that model of man because she doesn't have a positive example of manhood to follow. And that's what Rose West did as related to this whole courtship with Fred West, who clearly was a toxic individual. And even her dysfunctional father could figure that out after their first meeting. He figured out he was a pathological liar. But Rose continued to pursue him to the point where she concocted a scheme where she would quit her job, and then Fred would go out here and make it look like she was still getting a salary at the bread shop in order to continue to court him. But as Rose introduced Fred to her family, that's when they, even as dysfunctional as they are, knew how toxic this Fred West was, and said that this was not a man that they wanted their daughter to be involved with. And the father at that time in some way tried to protect his daughter by saying he would call social services if this grown 27-year-old man continued to associate with his daughter. Now, Rose's parents continued to forbid their daughter from dating Fred. However, that made her want him even more. And even if they went out here to explain it to social services, she still wanted to get involved with Fred West, who was like a Pookie in that this woman was attracted to him. But the reason why she was attracted to him is because she had low self-esteem. This was an older man who was paying attention to her, and this was a man who basically was similar to her father. So she was drawn to this man subconsciously due to him being like her father and being dysfunctional like her father. So she was attracted to this man and everything related to him. And even though they tried to keep him away from her, this made her want him even more. And Fred continued to be involved with Rose and continued to see Rose, even though they put her in a home for troubled teenagers. She continued to want him even more because she liked the attention she was getting from her parents, and she liked the attention she was getting from Fred, and that gave her a sense of twisted self-worth, and that's why she continued to look to continue to see Fred, and she continued to see Fred until she got further involved with him, where she basically wound up getting pregnant by Fred. And as she got pregnant by Fred, this is where she got and had her daughter, Heather. But after he had the daughter, Fred was locked up for stealing a taxi license and remained there for some time. But even though Rose was just 17, she was still looking to raise Fred's children and looked to raise Fred's children as their own mother. And even as she raised those children, she looked to participate in the abuse of those children because she didn't really respect those children. No, she really just wanted to get power over somebody else, and she wanted to get more power over someone because she felt powerless about her own life. Moreover, when it came to other children that were up by other women, she had a real issue with female competition, and it was that motivation for female competition that I believe was the motive for murder of Charmaine West, Fred West's daughter, by another woman. Because with this daughter who came from an Asian bus driver by his Fred West's first wife, Rose didn't want the competition from that daughter taking away attention from her. And because she didn't want that daughter taking away attention from her, what she did, I believe, was participate in the murder of Charmaine West, and participated in the murder of Charmaine West while Fred was in jail, because she really just wanted to eliminate the competition as related to the attention she would receive from Fred West. And as she looked to get rid of the competition, she then also looked to eliminate the further competition of Fred's wife, Catherine Reno West. And after she eliminated the competition of Catherine Reno West, which was Fred West's first wife, she was able to be in a place where she and her children could be the center of attention, and she could be the helpmeet to Fred West as related to helping him in continuing to build his dysfunctional household. And as Fred West built his dysfunctional household with Charmaine West, they wound up getting a 3-story home. And as they got that home, Fred West basically was a guy who was a Pookie, struggling and scavenging a life. And as he was scavenging a life and they were having a family, Fred West's wife, he had encouraged his wife to become a prostitute, which showed how completely disconnected and detached Fred West was from his wife, and completely disconnected and detached from his wife, because no man who loves his wife wants to see his wife going out here and having sex with other men. No man who loves his wife wants to see his wife out here being bought and sold by other men. But Fred West, being a sexual deviant who was disconnected and detached as related to sex, got power and pleasure from seeing his wife having her body used by other men, usually West Indian or black men, and got pleasure from seeing her having sex with men and women as related to this. And because you had Rose, basically, who was abused, had no understanding of boundaries, believed that having sex with different people was something normal, because she was used to people taking away her agency and taking away her power. She would engage in sex and look to get power in sex with both men and women, and look to go out here and violate women by participating in deviant sexual acts, looking to get power over the women. And again, basically shows me how her whole issues with abuse started with her father and then started to escalate into this sexually deviant violence as related to these deviant acts and the prostitution she participated in. She basically wound up escalating her behavior, and as she escalated her behavior, she got involved with things like BDSM and all of these different fetishes, and got involved even to the point where she was starting to collect videos of bestiality and abuse of children, and basically got off on, again, deviant behavior, escalating her need for power, which she had when Fred basically gave her control of the money and gave her her own room to participate in prostitution with peepholes so that he could watch this deviancy, and also had baby monitors in the room so he could listen to the deviancy, and just basically just really sick and twisted behavior. And what is even sicker than that is that Rose's father came to tolerate the marriage and even opened up a cafe called the Green Lantern, where they had business for a while. But the whole thing is that Fred and Rose West participated in a dysfunctional relationship, and in that dysfunctional relationship, they not only went out here and participated in sexual deviancy to get power, they also abused their own children and participated in the abuse of a 17-year-old girl that they said was a nanny. And that girl was basically wound up broken when she could not even get any sort of justice. I mean, the girl, Caroline Owens, thought, she could work for Fred West and Rose West, but wound up becoming very troubled after she wound up getting involved with the Wests. And after she tried to get justice for an alleged sexual assault, she could not get any justice. And this was just sick and twisted because she basically couldn't get justice and wound up attempting suicide at the end. But things as related to Rose West, she continued to look to be a helpmeet to Fred West and participating in the acts of torturing most of these 9 women that Fred had gone out here and kidnapped, and even helped with the kidnapping of several of these women. Several of these women he wound up bringing to her, and they wound up torturing them in their sexually deviant relationship. And in that sexually deviant relationship, they burned cigarettes on some of these women. Some of them, they mutilated them by taking off parts of their fingers and wound up torturing them. And this torture was all about getting power as related to Rose West, and she loved having this power. And that's the main reason why she stayed in this dysfunctional and twisted relationship with Fred West. And this relationship went on from the 1970s to about 1987, and eventually this entire relationship started to fall apart with the death of Fred West's daughter, who police were looking for because after they went to look for this daughter who had wound up disappearing in 1994, they soon found some human remains because they were looking for the case of the disappearance of Heather West, who wanted to get away from Fred West and his toxic environment. Now, this whole thing basically led to the arrest of Fred and Rose, who were already arrested before accused of sexually violating one of his 13-year-old daughters, but that case collapsed. However, they soon were looking for the other daughter, Heather West, and as they did their investigation and got a search warrant, they soon found the bodies. And as they found the bodies of these women under Fred West's home, this is where Rose West was implicated as related to being an accomplice to all of these murders, and implicated to being an accomplice to all of these murders. Rose West was basically locked up, and as Fred and Rose West were locked up in jail, Fred took the coward's way out of getting justice by killing himself on the 1st of January in 1995 to avoid dealing with the trial and possibly being sent to prison to encounter Bubba, Tiny, Roscoe, Big Dave, Melvin, and Mr. Sprinkles, who would have curb stomped him into the ground. And that's what left Rose West to be by herself after Fred's suicide. And after Fred's suicide, she wound up getting tried and convicted of her crimes. And after she was tried and convicted of her crimes, she then wound up being put in prison for the rest of her life and is still in prison to this day. Now, what's really sad about this whole situation with Fred and Rose West is that this man and woman in crisis, went out here and created a family filled with dysfunction. And as they created this family filled with dysfunction, they wound up putting their children on the road to becoming men and women in crisis. And those children were raised so dysfunctional in this home where they had to deal with sexual and physical abuse that they could not even function when they got out of that environment. And as they wound up getting out of that environment, several of Fred West's children basically wound up on a path where they wound up looking to wind up committing. So one boy, the West's son Barry, took a drug overdose and committed suicide at 40 years old, and he was battling a drug addiction and psychiatric problems due to all the trauma he suffered in that home. And both of Rose's children, basically Rose's biological children, suffered with issues. I mean, they all suffered issues due to the dysfunctional way they were raised inside of that home. And those children basically just could not deal with life because their mother and father basically put them on a road to becoming men and women in crisis. And a housemate that was living with the West was found in his car in 1996, committing, I believe, suicide as related to carbon monoxide poisoning, because he had dealt with so much evil and basically had to live with the evil because he allowed Fred West the white privilege and being an informant. And this was basically led to this man committing suicide because he basically enabled Fred West in all of the evil that he had done. So this whole situation basically wound up becoming one that not only shows how one generation of dysfunction can lead to another generation of dysfunction, and how one man in crisis or one woman in crisis can teach dysfunction from one generation to the next, because Rose West, basically as the first teacher of her children, taught them deviancy and violence as socially normal, and she learned that from her father. So sadly, that we have 2 to 3 generations of men and women in crisis with this entire situation as related to this entire family. And this couple in crisis basically shows what can happen when two twisted individuals get together and form a family. They become a couple in crisis, and that forms a family in crisis. And that family in crisis is a predator that preys on communities. That is the troubling thing with this entire situation. This whole situation with Fred West shows us what happens when society goes out here and gives white privilege to individuals who are dysfunctional. They go out here and again prey on society, and they get involved with deeply troubled women and form a couple in crisis. Now, if you want to learn more about what leads to males winding up becoming dysfunctional and out of control like Fred West and violent like he did, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to learn what leads to many women like Rose West winding up on a road to dysfunction and getting involved with dysfunctional boys and men like a guy like a Fred West, you can pick up my book, The Woman Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Woman Crisis at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. That's all I have to say for this special edition of Historical Couples in Crisis. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book The Man Crisis comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.